The court of Claudius's nephew had changed drastically since the emperor's illness. Caligula's recovery brought with it a colder disposition, one dominated by suspicion and sudden sharpened paranoia. The purges began swiftly. Marcus Junius Silanus, once his father-in-law, was ordered to take his own life, despite having remained loyal even after the death of his daughter in childbirth. Claudius's younger nephew, Gemellus, was likewise commanded to die, eliminated as a possible figurehead around whom Caligula's enemies might rally. Even those who had once prayed aloud for the gods to take their lives in exchange for the emperor's recovery were held to their word. Claudius had watched as one of the elderly senators, the same man who had once joined others at Claudius's own door to seek support, now stood in the arena, knees trembling, gladius in hand, made to face the very gladiators he had sworn to fight, should the emperor be spared. At official parties, even Ennia Thrasilla had toppled from her position on the central couch, now relegated to the side seats, nearer to Caligula's sisters, Agrippinilla and Livilla. It was Drusilla, his favourite, who now occupied the place beside the emperor. This alone was a breach of protocol. Traditionally, the head couch in the triclinium was reserved for the dominus and his wife. In the absence of a wife, as with Caligula, that role was filled by his sisters, rotating in descending order of age. But Caligula did not share his couch with Agrippinilla or Livilla. Drusilla alone assumed the role of mistress of the house, a gesture that, in the eyes of Rome's elite, gave weight to the whispers of incest. Claudius's niece, Agrippinilla, had given birth, a boy born in Antium, a child she had quietly hoped her brother might one day recognize as his heir. But Caligula had dismissed the idea immediately. He had another plan. During the worst of his illness, Caligula had rewritten his will, naming his sister Drusilla as heir. Had he not recovered, such a move would have thrown both the Senate and the Roman people into chaos, to say nothing of the legions who would never tolerate a woman at the head of Rome's armies. And so Caligula arranged a new marriage for Drusilla. By imperial command, her husband, Gaius Cassius Longinus, was forced to divorce her so that she could be wed to her first cousin, Marcus Aemilius Lepidus. Lepidus, one of Caligula's favourites, rumoured by some to be his lover, was the son of Julilla, the disgraced sister of Caligula's mother, who had died in exile on the island of Tremoris. Like Caligula and Drusilla, Lepidus was a great-grandson of the divine Augustus. Any child born of their union could be presented to Rome as a legitimate heir for adoption, descended from Augustus on both sides, a symbol of dynastic purity and a means of reviving the nearly extinguished Julian line. Agrippinilla's husband, Enobarbus, like Claudius himself, was descended not from Augustus, but from his sister, Octavia Thurina. To adopt a child of Agrippinilla would be to raise a rival branch. But to adopt a child of Drusilla and Lepidus would be to close ranks, to consolidate power within the Julian line alone, and to edge out the descendants of Octavia altogether. And so, when Agrippinilla had asked Caligula to name her son, a subtle but unmistakable gesture which reflected her ambition, he humiliated her instead. With a single glance across the triclinium, he not only mocked her indiscretions, but dragged Claudius into the insult as well, insinuating a scandal that left no one at the table untouched. As she stormed out of the banquet, Claudius felt a flicker of sympathy for Agrippinilla. She wasn't used to playing the court's fool, not as he was. That role had recently fallen to him. Before Caligula's illness, in the first flush of his rise to the imperial curule chair, Claudius had shared in the honours his nephew so lavishly bestowed upon the family. Caligula, newly made consul, had named Claudius his colleague. Who better to stand beside the son of Germanicus at the helm of Rome's government than the brother of Germanicus? Prior to that, the closest Claudius had ever come to real office was when Tiberius had granted him the consular ornaments, the regalia and honours of the consulship, without the office itself. It allowed Claudius to stand in as a representative of the imperial family at ceremonies deemed beneath the imperium of Tiberius or Castor. A costume to wear, nothing more. His first task as actual consul of the Roman government was to oversee the public honouring of Caligula's fallen brothers. Statues of Nero and Drusus were to be carved in marble and erected in the Forum Romanum, monuments to the young princes cut down in the reign of Tiberius. But by the time Caligula recovered from his illness and the new consuls had already taken office, only the statue of Nero had been completed, a fact that greatly displeased the emperor. And Caligula made his displeasure known, in petty but very public ways. He mocked Claudius's limp at dinner parties, imitated his stutter for laughs, and jerked his head in mimicry of the twitching that seized Claudius whenever stress overtook him. Should Claudius drink too much wine and doze off on his sofa, Caligula would prompt the guests reclining on their own couches to pelt him with olives and dates, rousing him to the sound of laughter and jeers. Caligula's humiliation of Agrippinilla had also been a joke at his expense. The insinuation that poor old Uncle Claudius had been among his niece's sexual conquests. But he hadn't, had he? Claudius had attended one or two of those wild parties Caligula hosted in the earliest days of his reign, and he had drunk much, perhaps too much. The one thing Caligula did not mock was Claudius's marriage. It had been agreed upon before he fell ill, postponed during his absence, then quietly arranged once the crisis had passed. His was a union that drew little public interest, save those still watching the bloodlines. Valeria Messalina, Claudius's new wife, was no court ornament. Like Claudius himself, she descended not from Augustus, but from his sister, Octavia, and through her mother, Lepida, also traced descent from Mark Antony, just like Claudius. Theirs was a union of lineage, a quiet consolidation of the lesser branch of the Julii. But for Caligula it was a curiosity, perhaps even a threat. Claudius was paterfamilias of what remained of the imperial Claudian branch of the family. He needed no permission from Caligula to marry a woman from any other family. But that did not mean Caligula would be happy. So Caligula responded as only he could, with a wedding gift, a priesthood. The Sodales Augustales was the elite priestly college established by Tiberius after the deification of Caesar Augustus. Drawn from the highest aristocratic ranks, its members, which now included Claudius, held responsibilities that were not merely religious, but ideological. They reinforced the divine right of Augustus's descendants to rule Rome, which now meant Caligula. But Claudius was not stupid. This priesthood had not been offered as an honour. It was a burden, one that bound him to publicly glorify the divinity of Caligula and his sisters, and one that came with a price. The Sodales Augustales was ruinously expensive. Its members were expected to underwrite sacrifices, festivals and games, each more lavish than the last, all in service of imperial apotheosis. Before his marriage to Messalina, Claudius could never have afforded such a position, nor had one been offered. Her dowry changed that, but only just. Now, instead of elevating his household, the money would be drained in service to the state cult. Claudius could keep his consular status, but he would remain impoverished. It was a clever manipulation, a silent, smiling leash, one that ensured Claudius could not use his newfound wealth to rise in the shadows. Once again, Claudius was sidelined.